Hello and welcome to episode 462 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, a slightly different setup this week.
Yeah, exciting. If you head over to the YouTube channel this week, the YouTube version of this podcast is going live at the same time as the audio version that you guys are probably listening to. So we are now committed to doing the video version and videoing the podcast. And the important thing, if you go over there, there are certain things that work visually that won't work on the podcast when you listen to it on your podcast app. But you'll also see that I am wearing the original jumper by complete coincidence. Today I went into the wardrobe and pulled out a jumper. It is summer, but it's freezing in the UK. It's the original jumper that I wore about 8 years ago when I did the photo shoot for the image of me at the top of the Money to the Masses website. So the most amazing thing about it is that, well, there's no moth holes in it, but more importantly, I fit in it still. And I'm really pleased. I'm really pleased about that. So
I'm going to ask you to sit still in a minute and I'll take a screenshot and then I'm going to do a before and an after. What is it, sort of 6 or 7 years since the original photo, maybe?
Yeah.
So, and we'll see how you've aged.
I'm looking at the camera, Andy. I don't think it picks up the grey hair in my beard. So I think I'll be okay, because obviously in the original picture, I was younger and didn't have the few flecks of grey that I've now got in my beard. So that is obviously exciting for us, and you can see us on the YouTube channel, but it's an important point. I'm going big on social media now. So if you've been following us on TikTok, on Instagram and YouTube, I'm now putting out lots of short videos, stuff that you won't get on the podcast. There are lessons in money. There are things that actually have a bit of our personality in them, funny as well. So make sure that you go over there and follow us. Now, if everybody does this, now you can find links in the show notes. So you can go to each of the profiles and you can therefore start following us. If you all do it, and I beg you, please do go and do it, then we should gain thousands and thousands of followers in a single day. So we know how many thousands of you listen to the show. And then can I ask that when we put out that stuff, then you interact with it, you like it, you share it, because again, it's all to do with money. And if you love the show and you love supporting us, yes, go to the Money to the Masses page that we've built, moneytothemasses.com/podcast, where you can see ways of supporting the show. But one of the most effective ways you can support the show going forward is to follow us on all our social channels and like all the content that we do and share it, because that will really help Money to the Masses and keep this podcast going.
Okay, so let's get on with this week's show then. We're going to be doing 3 pieces as usual. So Damien, what have we got coming up?
So the first piece this week is going to be regarding phones and you're having your phone stolen. Now, unfortunately, a friend of mine, their wife had their phone snatched out of their hand while walking along a London street. And perhaps they were unaware, they actually live abroad and she's not from the UK. So perhaps she wasn't quite aware of the crime in the UK where people actually go along on bikes and steal phones out of people's hands, particularly in London. And therefore, we want to do a piece on what to do if your phone is stolen, because after that happened, he was then sending messages around to us as a group of friends. What should he do? Blah, blah, blah. So we was giving him advice. We're going to do that on the podcast. So if it happens to you, you know what to do. The second piece I want to do is in relation to picking the best performing funds out there. So I want to highlight some important lessons when you're looking at past performance. Yes, it's not a guide to future returns, but there are some interesting things or stats that I just want to point out. And the final piece on the podcast is something that actually riled me a bit that I saw on social media, and it was a joke that was told in relation to life insurance for stay-at-home parents, in this case stay-at-home mum, and I want to use it as a lesson in money, an important lesson in money.
Okay, so let's start with the first piece of the podcast then. Now, Damien, you mentioned a friend of yours that sadly had their phone taken while visiting London, and it is a rising crime at the moment. In fact, Claire Barrett from the Financial Times wrote a piece recently. A similar thing happened to her when she was waiting at a bus stop. Now, mobile phone theft is more common than even credit card crime and also theft of cash. So it is the most popular crime that's happening in London at the moment. And while a mobile phone is likely to have obviously value to you in terms of the cost of the phone, maybe a few £100s, The real issue here is an unlocked mobile phone, because if one of those is stolen from you, it could generate a thief thousands of pounds, as criminals can gain access to your bank accounts, personal information, which they can sell online, and they can apply for other lines of credit in your name once they have your information. And so you can quickly see there how quickly this can unravel and how it can impact you, not just in terms of losing your phone, but in terms of all aspects of your financial life.
And the other key thing is that they steal your phone because they want it unlocked while you're using it. So you're using the phone, it's unlocked, they steal it, and therefore it's unlocked, and they can access what's in your phone.
Yeah, so we're going to look at things that you can do to try and preempt any issues, to try and make sure that you're as safe as possible if you're in the unfortunate situation that this happens. So the first thing we're going to cover now, this is going to seem really, really obvious, but unbelievably, when you buy a new smartphone, you can disable a lot of these features. I don't know why anyone would do it, but let's cover the first things first. Make sure that you set up not only a passcode, but if your phone allows it, to try and set up facial and also fingerprint recognition. It does seem obvious, but again, you can technically set up a new phone without implementing those. So if you don't currently have passcodes or fingerprints or facial recognitions on an iPhone, it's really simple. Go to your settings, Face ID and passcode, and then it's the setting that says Touch ID and passcode, and ensure that you activate all of those. On Android, you go to Settings, Security and Privacy, Device Unlock, and there'll be settings in there where you can sort out your facial recognition and apply your fingerprint data in there. Android users, just a word of warning, I'm an Android user myself. Some of the features within certain phones and certain apps, they can be fooled by a photo. So if you're setting up facial recognition, be careful. I personally would add fingerprint recognition and maybe even use fingerprint over and above facial recognition. So that's just a word of warning on there.
Yeah, and actually, I can say that these things have got better because Justin and I, obviously twins, if you follow us over a long period of time, and Justin and I, we don't look that alike now as we've become adults, but we were able to unlock each other's phones with facial recognition up until about a year ago. So they've obviously keep improving it all the time, so we can no longer unlock each other's phones. So if you have a twin that's gone a bit rogue, then you might want to be careful as well.
Yeah, the next thing I wanted to mention was a new feature on iPhones, and it's coming soon on Android as well, and it's called Stolen Device Protection. Now, rather than me waffling on for a couple of minutes, I'm just going to play out a really good social media clip where someone explained what it is and what it does, and I think everyone with an iPhone should go in and do this straight away. Pause the podcast and go and do this. So I'll just play this out now.
I can't believe my iPhone was stolen on vacation. That's awful. Did you turn on stolen device protection? Wait, what's that? It's a new feature for iPhone's latest update with two main benefits. First, if someone tries to change your password and your phone is not at a trusted location like your house, your iPhone will require a 1-hour wait period and then perform a second Face ID or Touch ID. That way, even if the thief knows your passcode, you still have an hour to report your device as stolen and remotely lock or wipe it. And second, if someone tries to access your saved passwords or credit cards, iPhone will require either Face ID or Touch ID depending on your phone, with no passcode fallback, so only you can access these features. This prevents the thief from stealing money or opening an Apple Card in your name. Well, how do I make sure it's set up? Just open up the Settings app and click Face ID and Passcode and make sure Stolen Device Protection says on.
So there we go, Damien. She explained it far better than I did there. And anyone listening to the podcast can actually go and check out the YouTube video itself, because you can actually see it in action, and she explains how to do the settings on there.
Yeah, we just showed it on screen for those of you watching on YouTube, but I went and put it on my phone because it isn't on there by default. And when I saw that video originally, I thought, oh, it'll probably just be turned on anyway, but it isn't. So do that, because it is something that probably could end up saving you a lot of time and potentially money.
And so, yeah, that's a great feature for iPhones. And for Android users, a similar feature will be added in the next update of Android 10 Plus, I think it is. You'll just need to wait a little bit longer. It's coming later this year. And that update is going to feature another 2 or 3 extra security updates as well. So it's definitely worth looking out for that update when it comes out and applying those extra security features. The next one I want to talk about is the Find My features, and they're available on both iPhone and Android. They work slightly differently, but ultimately they're the same thing. These services enable you to track your phone even if you don't have your phone. So you can do it via another device. Let's say you've got an iPhone, but you've also got an iPad. You can also do it online via your Mac. And similarly with Androids, you can go on to another device, whether it be your laptop at home, and you can have a password that you log in, and you can ultimately control and track your phone. So you could theoretically go on and disable your phone. You could lock your phone. You could wipe data or move data from your phone to another place, maybe a secure place in the iCloud, for example. So it's a really useful feature to have. Now, if you've got a Samsung phone, Samsung devices themselves have a slightly separate feature, and I've got this on my phone. It's called Smart Things Find, and it works in a very similar way. It's a website that you log into and you can control your phone from the website, and that's called Smart Things Find.
And presumably you can use those for all Samsung devices, because I think I set up my Samsung TV and it did it, and I would be quite surprised if my Samsung TV wasn't on where I thought it would be on the wall. But if it did somehow move, then we could find it. But I think the key thing about those services, that the reality is you are not John McClane and going to be going after your phone and tracking down bad guys to go and get your phone back. That's not advisable. The reality is that you would probably want to erase the device so that all the data is wiped off it, so it's basically been bricked. That would be something for you personally, because obviously you don't want them to be able to start accessing other apps and transferring money and doing all sorts of things. So the important thing is to end up clearing the data that they have access to.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing to do is to ensure that you make your notifications private. Now, I don't know why people do this. I mean, we're all different, I'm sure. But when you have notifications coming through on your phone, whether it's from WhatsApp, whether it's from the messages, whether it's an email, you can activate a setting that allows it to pop up on your lock screen and preview or even show the full message. Now, while that might be convenient if you're working and you can just see it on your phone, you don't have to unlock it, that is a gift to any thief. Even if your phone is locked and somehow they've got access to the back system, if they're trying to access things and things are popping up on the phone without even up to having to unlock the device, then that's going to be perfect for them. So the idea here is make it as difficult as possible for a thief. It might be a little bit more inconvenient for you, but you've got to weigh up the pros and cons. You just need to go into your settings on your phone and go into the message notifications, and then you can turn them to private so they don't come up on your lock screen. Do you have that feature? Do you ever have your who is it that has their messages just popping
Andy,
up on their screen?
I have to say, it was originally set up like that. So originally, all messages were visible. And then I actively went and made them private, because if you recall, we did a podcast where there was we did a segment where there'd been some scams where people were breaking into things like gym lockers and getting people's phones, and they were able to access services by being able to get PIN numbers showing on the screen without being able to unlock the phone. They couldn't work out how they were doing it, and it was by using the method of getting PIN numbers and things sent to phones, and you could still technically get them sent to phones and you could read them if you didn't have your messages put on private. So do make sure you do that. I think that's an important one just generally anyway.
Another thing to do, and it's a really, really simple fix and a really obvious one, is adjust your phone's auto lock or screen timeout settings. Obviously, it's inconvenient sometimes if you're working over here and then you're going back to your phone and with it constantly locking and then having to unlock it either with your fingerprint or your face. It can be a frustration. So some people will have maybe 10 or 15 minutes before their phone automatically locks or times out. Again, that might be convenient for you, but that's also extremely convenient for someone who's stolen your phone and it's currently unlocked. That gives them longer to access all the information. So I have my phone that locks after 30 seconds of any interaction. It frustrates my wife. Sometimes, when you're passing phones across and she's looking at stuff, she's like, "Oh, your phone's locked again." And I said, yeah, well, that's how I've set it up, because it's no bother to me to quickly put my thumbprint on it and unlock it again. And I know that I'm a bit more secure by doing it that way.
Yeah, and also with Face ID now, it's not really that much of a hassle that you look at your phone, it unlocks automatically anyway. So like you, Andy, I've set mine to the shortest. It can be a little bit frustrating, but like all these things, prevention is always better than cure. So if you try and limit what can happen if your phone gets stolen, then yes, it's inconvenient, but the potential fallout is going to be reduced, and particularly in terms of financial.
And so the last couple of tips really is make sure that you've got two-factor authentication. I think most people know what that is these days. It's where you have an additional layer of security. Let's say, for example, if you access your Gmail from another account, let's say you're on someone else's computer at a friend's house, in order to access that information, it will want to send a code probably to your phone or your iPad, wherever you set it up to go to. And it just ensures that you are who you say you are, and that phone is in the same location and same IP address maybe as the one that's trying to access it. Obviously, if someone else has got your phone, that's not necessarily going to help, but these extra layers of security are going to help your overall security anyway. And the one thing I just wanted to finish with is, even if your phone is locked and it's stolen, there is a chance that a criminal can still know your PIN. Now that seems a bit crazy, but there have been instances, particularly in busy areas like London, where criminal gangs are operating and there are multiple people that are looking for opportunities to steal phones. And so they may have what's called a spotter. So that will be someone maybe at a bus stop that's standing right behind you, and he's watching you do your thing on your phone. And he may or she may then know your PIN code because they've been watching you. Your phone is then taken and then they can access your data. So just be mindful, be aware of who's around you, get your phone put away. If you are putting in codes into your phone, make sure that no one else is watching you. And there is something you can get that can actually help with this. It's called a privacy screen. They cost about £10. I think you get them in packs of 2 usually, and you can literally stick them to your phone. And it's like one of those screen protectors that you can put on, and it means that your phone can't be viewed from certain angles, and it gives you a bit more extra privacy. So I'd definitely consider that if you're often in areas where you can easily be overlooked.
But then going back to your point about biometrics, that kind of avoids that because you're not putting a PIN number. I want to add 2 probably important ones that I think everyone should go away and do now. On that one that you've just mentioned, a lot of people will use a PIN number to unlock their phone if they're not using a biometric like their Face ID, but they will often use the same PIN number for every app that they register that asks for a PIN code. An issue with that is that if somebody has done that or spotted or somehow knows what your unlock button is, your PIN number I should say, then they could go into your banking apps and then they will try that number. And if you've got that same number, then straight away they're going to probably be authorized. Even if your bank sends a code and they've got your phone, etc., then they are going to be able to access it. So I would say, if you are listening to this, make sure you go to every banking app that you've got and ensure that the PIN is not the same as your phone PIN or any other PIN. They're unique. But more importantly, a lot of them now, because I did this about a month ago, I actually did a sort of, I thought about this and I went through the phone just to make sure what were all the PINs on all my different apps. And most of them now do allow biometrics. So they will allow Face ID. So I would suggest that everyone activates that. Of course, after a couple of failed attempts, they will usually ask for that PIN code. So you do still need to have one, but try and make it unique and try and make it certainly different to your main phone. And the other one, which I think is probably the one that when I spoke to my friend, I actually suggested one of the first things to do is to online, using a computer, whatever, go into your email account and immediately disable the phone's ability to access your emails. Because the thing is, when you have a phone, it automatically has access to your email where you've allowed it. So you don't put PIN numbers in. And that enables the thief to reset nearly anything that they want in your life, because it will ultimately send authorization, PIN codes to your email address. They can get it to do that. And once they have access to that, they can take off over pretty much your entire life. I would argue that your email inbox is probably the most sacred thing that you have, because it's the one thing that banks, building societies, services you use will communicate with you on a security basis. So make sure that you don't forget to change that so they don't start then taking over other areas of your life. And I've seen some awful stories of where people have had their emails hijacked and they've had passwords changed, etc., and then they've actually been blackmailed to try and get their life back. So do make sure you do change your email passwords and you disable its access as well, just to ensure that you aren't going to have any problems further down the line. And as ever, if you have your phone stolen, then do be vigilant anyway. Do keep a check on your credit report to make sure there's no other types of credit being taken out or activity that you're unaware of. You just have to remain vigilant even after that initial theft. So hopefully, I think we've given people some things to do in terms of prevention, and also one or two things to think about if it does actually happen to them.
And one final tip on that I would just say, if you're a person who has a particular phone case that you can slide in your bank cards on the inside of that, I've heard situations where people have not only put all of their bank cards, including their debit and credit cards, they also had their driving license in there. And, well, you might as well gift wrap that and pass it over to the criminal and say, do your best, because that's not going to help you in that situation. First thing you should do, change your phone cover. Please don't put your bank cards in your phone case. Okay, so let's move on to the next piece of the podcast then. We're going to be talking about fund performance.
Yeah, so this was inspired by an update actually to an article on the Money to the Masses website. So we have an article that we update periodically about the best performing funds that are out there. And this isn't behind 80/20 Investors paywall. You can go and see this article. We'll put a link to it in the notes of this show. And what it does is it shows you the funds that have outperformed within their sectors over a period of time. But it also gives you some valuable lessons in there. And one of those, or a few of those, I want to bring to the podcast because we updated the numbers and it's actually quite surprising. So one of the things that we often hear and we talk about is that when you're looking at funds to invest in, that active fund managers tend to underperform the market over the long term. And the stat you often hear bandied around is about 90% of them fail to outperform the market over the long term. Well, the thing is, if you do look at a platform and do research funds, you will find funds, active ones, that do outperform the market over the long term. It's just that most of them don't. And of course, if you are somebody who wants to invest in passive, that's fantastic. Obviously, you'll get the return of whatever index your passive investment is tracking, or the amalgamation of indices. So if you've got something that's a passive global tracker, it might have a mixture of assets in it, then you're going to get something that's going to match the performance of the markets that it tracks. Of course, you are going to marginally underperform. Give you an example. If you had a FTSE 100 tracker, you aren't going to get the exact performance of the FTSE 100 because there's also a tracking error. So that's the margin of error when they're trying to actually replicate what's going in the FTSE 100. And of course, there is a charge as well that's associated with any investment. So you will always, if you have a passive investment, marginally underperform the index that particular passive investment tracks, if it's a tracker, of course. So that out the way, that's obviously fine. But if you are going for active funds, then I was looking at the performance of a whole sector. So we're looking at UK all companies. So these are funds that invest in UK equities. And it was really to highlight the point that just because a fund actually does perform well over a long period of time, it doesn't guarantee it's going to continue to do so. So there are a lot of people out there that get swept up in star managers. So they think a manager's performed really well. Neil Woodford was a famous example, and therefore they're going to continue to do so. His was quite a spectacular fall from grace, but there are still examples of funds that then don't continue to outperform and actually start to lag not only their peers but the wider market. So I looked at the UK all companies sector and I looked at the performance between 2009 and 2019. And I picked the top 10, or found the top 10 funds over that period of time, and see how they perform and rank them. And to give you the names, these aren't recommendations, this is just an observation of what occurred. Slater Growth was one of them that outperformed. It was the top performer actually. In number 2 was the Marlborough Special Situations, and the list goes down. I'm not going to give it all. We're going to put a link in the notes of the podcast. You can go and see the article and view it for yourself. If you watch the YouTube version of this show, we'll actually flash a table up on screen so you can see it. But the point was that once you've got those 1 to 10, then at 2019, what happened to those funds if you'd invested in them over the next 5 years? Were they still the top performers in that sector, given that they'd actually performed very well for a long period of time with 10 years of top performance and massively outperforming their sector average, but also the wider market. I'd give you an example. The Marlborough Special Situations Fund, for example, over that 10-year period between 2009 and 2019, it was up 424%, which is a mind-blowing number. Meanwhile, the UK all companies average was 142%, and the FTSE 100 was trading at 121%. It's not exactly disgraceful, it's just not done as well as that particular fund. And there will be reasons why that fund did particularly well. It'd be because of the kind of assets it's been in, and I'd argue actually probably some smaller company exposure in there as well. But they're the wider sort of indices, and you can see how it's performed. 2019 to 2024, the next 5 years, how did that fund actually perform? And if I was to sit there and give you a chance to guess, I think most people would think, well, out of the 153 funds in that sector, the UK all company sector, even if it probably hadn't done so well, they might think it would appear in the top 10%, top 20, top half even. Well, actually it was 141st out of 153 funds. So it went from second over 10 years to suddenly propping up the performance table. So over that 5-year period, it returned 11.42%. Now you compare that to the sector average, that was 30.12, and the FTSE 100 was 38.9%. So just because a fund performs well over a long period of time, that doesn't guarantee that it's going to perform well over the next 5 years. So when you're picking investments, you can't guarantee that future performance is obviously going to replicate even the most outstanding funds over a period of time. And it also highlights something that I bang on a lot about when it comes to investing, is about consistency. So consistency is different to just being top performing, because you may have had a period where suddenly the performance, there was something going on in the world that really benefited the way that particular fund was managed or set up. And it could be, for example, a fund has more exposure to smaller companies than the rest of the sector. And of course, that particular exposure, smaller companies might have done very well over a period of time for whatever reason. And that might then change, and therefore they become a laggard. So somebody who had invested in the Marlborough fund that I mentioned over 15 years, they might look at that number if they were actually doing some research and go, well, that's up 484%. That's brilliant. But actually, 424% of that was in the first 10 years. In the next 5 years, it hadn't done so much. So it's also an example of the power of compounding over time. So that's where you get growth on your growth. But it does also show that active can outperform passives, but it will tend to do it for periods of time. It won't do it over extended periods of time. The passive investors over 15 years, if they had a FTSE 100 tracker, would have had 207% return, which was basically in line with the average fund from the UK all company sector, which, if you want, for want of a better word, is like the average of the active UK equity funds. So you can outperform, but it tends to happen during periods. You need to keep monitoring your investments if you are going to be picking very active funds. If you are somebody who's going to invest and forget, and you're investing in passives or tracker funds in particular, then you aren't so bothered, because you are just tracking the indices. You might review your wider makeup of your portfolio in terms of asset mix or which markets you want to track. But the point is that active funds, you do need to keep monitoring them. Every dog has its day, effectively, when it comes to investing, and styles do come and go and have their period in the sun. And you do obviously get people like what happened to Neil Woodford that actually end up getting it completely wrong at some point. So don't believe in star managers. It's a message that we've talked about before on the podcast. And just a final point, you might be thinking, well, that was Marlborough. What happened to the other 10? I take it some of those absolutely smashed it. Well, the average position in their sector over that subsequent 5-year period, after they had an absolute belting first 10 years, or the 10 years that I covered, then that average position was actually 101st. Well, there's actually only 153 funds within that sector. And so that shows you, typically, they all actually underperformed their sector average, and they all typically, therefore, underperformed the wider market. So you can't get any guarantee from past performance. Of course, people will look at that, but you have to bear that in mind, and you have to be a little bit more nimble and engage with your portfolio if you are going to be buying into active funds in particular.
Okay, so let's move on to the final piece of the podcast then. And this is coming off the back of something that you've seen on social media, Damien, and it riled you. So what have we got on this piece?
So this was a clip that we're going to play out on the podcast, and it's a joke, really, from Joel Dommett. Well, I assume it's a joke. He's telling a story, I think, on a podcast show that he's actually doing, I think, with his wife. And we'll play the clip out. But I am somebody who likes jokes and comedians with the best of them. But it was a message that was therefore given when you tell a joke that's actually based in ignorance. And so from my point of view, I'm going to want to give the counterpoint to this, to use it as an example or a way of teaching people about a really important point to do with money.
Getting a medical done today. And she was like, why? I said, for life insurance. And she said, what? So why are you getting life insurance and I'm not getting life insurance?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm getting life insurance. So if I die, then you can continue to have sort of the money that I'm earning for yours and the rest of Wild's life. She was like, I want life insurance. I was like, look, I'm going to be honest. If sadly you were to pass away, I don't need that check, man.
All I'm saying, right? My Depop is kicking
Your
off.
Depop is kicking
My
off, man.
Depop, the offers are rolling in. So
Yes.
you might change your mind.
Dude,
I
I
am
love
down
you.
the post office plenty of days.
I love you.
So Damien, over to you.
Yeah, so I get it. It's presumably a joke. I'm not talking about his life and his wealth and what his needs are. But the point was that I saw that and it just highlighted the fact that there's a lot of ignorance around the idea about life insurance. So the one thing I would give him credit for, that he actually highlighted the fact that you do sometimes have to do a medical when you take out life insurance. You don't always just apply online and get it. But the point was that he said there that it was a check he didn't need. But I also would question, for most people out there, it's a check that they will need, because the idea that if somebody is a stay-at-home parent, that they have no value, that's wrong. And for most people, what they don't realise, that if there's a stay-at-home parent, that they actually enable somebody to be able to go out if there's the main breadwinner. And so what I want everybody who listens to this podcast is to actually think about what would happen if their partner, if they are a stay-at-home parent, what would happen if they die? Now, I want to point out what is likely to happen is that initially you're going to have childcare needs, because that person actually empowers you and helps you to be able to go out and earn money. So your earnings potential will be impacted if you are going to have to start doing more of the childcare. Maybe they're going to need help. Are they going to be, you might want to have time off with your children after your partner dies, for example. And so there is a monetary value associated with what stay-at-home parents do. And this goes on to a wider thing that I pointed out when we did a podcast. We're going to link to it in the notes of the show, which was about female economics. And it was actually highlighting the point that women in particular, obviously there are a lot of people who stay at home, so females, so mums are undervalued. So any stay-at-home parent is undervalued, but it's particularly a thing we'll see with the outsized contribution that women play to the role of parenting and therefore to the economy. It's not actually included in the official GDP figures. That therefore means that it's actually not officially given any value or recognised, and therefore that's why you end up getting views that are ignorant, where people say, well, there's no value because, well, you don't work. So my point is, yes, that might be a joke and some people might think it's hilarious. That has had nearly 750,000 views. It's also been shared and liked 10,000 times. So that message, where it's been shared to people, is not going to be, I'd argue, look, this person's got it wrong. It's going to be laughing at the joke and actually, therefore, probably reinforcing the fact that, yeah, if there's a stay-at-home parent, you don't need to insure them. You will likely need to. So if you are thinking about life insurance, then do seek advice. We'll put a link in the notes of the show to how you can get free impartial advice. And a good advisor will look at all of your needs, and that would include asking you difficult questions and visualizing what would happen if you do have a stay-at-home partner who looks after the children if they died. So there are reasons why you would get insurance for your partner. So I'm not being a killjoy, but after 14 years of doing this, and you try and teach people about money and things that they don't realize, then you get something that's shared virally on social media that completely undermines that and actually increases the level of ignorance around certain topics. So if you do see this go out on YouTube or whatever, then do please share it. It's not because we want to just promote money to the masses, it's actually because we want people to understand the need for insurance. And if one person out there changes their view about stay-at-home parents and the value that they add, or they suddenly realise that they are underinsured, then this podcast has done its job.
Absolutely. So that's it. We are done for this week. You can get in touch in the usual ways. It's Damien@moneytothemasses.com if you want to send an email. You can email me. It's Andy@moneytothemasses.com. Please do leave a message on the YouTube video of this podcast, because any feedback and questions we will respond to. And really, it's the best place for us to be able to come up with ideas for future shows. And remember, the YouTube video from this podcast, if you're listening to the podcast, it will be up the same time this week as the audio podcast as well, with potentially some additional few bits in there that didn't work for the audio version. So do check that out. And don't forget to review the podcast in all the usual ways via your podcast app of choice.
Most importantly, I fully expect to see tens of thousands of people following us on our channels, because that is the one thing I want you all to do this week, is go on there and follow us. Even if you don't engage with the platform, open up an account and just follow us anyway. And then everything we do, please do like and share it, because it will really, really help not only this show, but the wider Money to the Masses empire, newsletters, everything like that. Do please make sure that you do support us.
And so that's it. We are done for this week. Until next time.
Until next time.